Hello there. This little lecture is on tree response to disturbance, and this is going to focus on how do trees react when they are disturbed, in other words, damage to themselves, or there's a disturbance of trees in their vicinity. And you can see here we have two fellows from like Lord of the Rings who certainly would not want to meet in the forest, but pretty cool looking dudes anyways. So, and we're going to move on now. I'm just going to go through some of the disturbances that can occur and how they may occur. So the first, one of the most common ones is mechanical damage, and as you can see here, the tree has been damaged, and you can see this all over the place. Anywhere where there's been logging, or even in the city where vehicles have bumped up against trees and have damaged the cambium layer. And it all starts out with this kind of damage. And then if you can get really severe things like fire damage, this kind here, all have an influence on how the tree will grow from that period on. So scars are a big component to creating disturbance of a tree. The next one is, so if somebody bumped on a tree was the first one, or there was a fire, the next one I want to talk about is idea of adventitious roots. Now, adventitious roots, what they are, just as the word you can see, is take advantage type of roots. And what happens is that if you put more than 2 inches of topsoil or any kind of soil on top of roots, that's a great way to kill them. And you can see a lot of that in cities, or people want to level their backyard, and they proceed and put more soil around the tree and promptly kill the roots, which kills the tree. Out in nature, and because we're focusing out in not in the urban setting, what we notice is that some species can actually take advantage when situations arise where their roots are in danger of dying. Poplar and black spruce, what happens is if there is a flood, or there is a significant amount of standing water, they will create these adventitious roots, like here you can see them, okay, to grow above where the roots are dying. So quite often they would grow into the new soil, or in black spruce's case, they would grow above in the moss, which is not water saturated. Remember, roots need air to breathe. They cannot survive underwater. This one here is what I want to talk about here. Is this whole area is the idea of weakened trees invite insects and disease, and that's not the end of the forest, but other trees in the area may take advantage of, now that the competition is gone, and now that tree disturbance will provide opportunity for other trees to grow. So that's another way to look at that. Freezing damage, again, is not a huge one, but what it creates, freezing damage, and you've ever been in the bush on a really cold day in the winter and you hear a big pop, and what you may be hearing is the cracking, a frost crack being created in a tree. Particularly straight grain trees are notorious for this. Ash is one of them. Or you can have dehydrated needles, as shown here, and they dry out. And this is particularly when it suddenly warms up and in the middle of the winter, and they desiccate because of this warming up. So that's another disturbance and damage to a tree. One that occurs, and here I have a little example of it in that can occur in some trees, is sun scald. That's like if you, well, let's say myself, if I go out for too long, I burn like a red lobster, look like one anyways, and sun scald can happen to trees when they are suddenly exposed to sun. For maple, regeneration is well known to do that. And a lot of fruit trees, they have to deal with this issue also. So what they do this is from the States area, is they whitewash the trees to to prevent winter sun scald. When the leaves are off the trees and the sun can beat right down on the trees, they actually whitewash them, paint them, to minimize the damage. That's a unique situation. What we try to do in the forest in Canada for maples, we don't suddenly open them up and expose them to sun scald, but we try to provide sufficient shade for the regeneration. But it's another type of disturbance or damage that can occur to trees. This is just to talk about shade leaves. They stay. This is not really a disturbance, but it's an indicator of juvenile leaves. One that is very prominent is release from overhead shade. Once a tree is in the understory, and as it grows and it gets damaged, and it's growing, and quite often the branches will grow more across than they will straight up. And then when they're released, the branches start to head up, and the result is that you get these strange looking trees, and that is a disturbance to the tree. Alright, this one here, what you're going to see is crown breakage. What we're looking here is that if a tree gets snapped off like it is here, how will it affect the tree? Well, obviously what's going to happen is that the remaining branches will start to turn up, and they will continue to grow, and having the top gone, that regeneration will start to appear nearby, so will greatly influence that tree and the forest in that area. Water sprouts, or epicormic sprouting, as it's quite often called, is a sign that a tree is under stress. That's for sure. And we're seeing that unfortunately now in southern Ontario with emerald ash borer, where trees that have been attacked by the emerald ash borer are under stress, and then you'll see suddenly all these little branches coming out from the lower part of the bowl, right? And this is not a good sign when you see little branches coming out, because usually the tree is saying, well, I'm going to be kicking the bucket. I've got to create get these advantageous branches, epicormic branches, to start growing, so that as a tree it can survive as the major part of the tree is probably going to die. So this is why it's never great to see these little advantageous shoots. Epicormic sprouting is called also, or they're called also water sprouts. So one of the things is that when as a disturbance occurs in the forest, it's not always negative, and I want to stress that it's not always negative, because what happens is quite often is that a tree that is growing close competition with other trees has very tight annual rings. You can see how close they are to each other, and each ring, of course, is a year. But once if some of the trees die, that leaves more room for this particular tree to grow, and you can see how the growth rings get larger. And so for the advantage to a disturbance for some trees that remain is larger growth in diameter. Roots can even be influenced, and this is a pretty wild photo, but basically roots can be greatly influenced by disturbances, and the most common type in the forest are beaver flooding areas, and the roots drowning and change and having to take advantage of other sides which may be on higher ground. Other one is if one large tree lands across another tree and dams up water, or if there's a man-made influence like a trail, be it even for walking or for cars, mountain bikes, whatever, it can all impact on the roots. Now, this is one image I want you to take in for a while, because it's a very important one, because it pretty well does a nice job of, this comes out of forest dynamics. out of the chapters out of that book. It's just an excellent book. You can buy that if you ever care to. Let's take a look at what this is showing here. There's a lot of information, but it's nice. It wraps it all up in a nice graph of what you need to know in regard to disturbance. So the disturbance severity, it goes from light, okay, a light disturbance, to a medium disturbance, to a severe disturbance, okay. And then we have over here is the regeneration, okay. And how does the regeneration occur? So let's take a look. I'll give you some examples, and then you can kind of plow through this yourself. So let's say, let's start off with one. If we have, for example, I'd like to try one that's easy to understand. Okay, if we have, for example, a cool fire, in other words, it just comes racing through, okay. What kind of regeneration mechanism can be favored? Okay, and the regeneration that can be favored, one of them, is stump sprouts. Okay, and then in our case, in our part of the world, and this is for all of North America, what species would favor that? Well, the species that would favor stump sprouts would be oaks, definitely. They are really well known for taking the after a fire, and when all the other trees are burnt to the ground, the oak root system will regenerate very aggressive shoots, as will red maple especially, and young sugar maple. Okay, so you can see how a cool fire can cause any of the tree species that can do stump sprouts will take advantage. Note the poplars don't work well in here, or do the balsam fir or the pines. If we look at another example, okay, I'll just escape that. If we look at another example, okay, let's say we have logging practice. Okay, if we have a logging occurring, and when the logging occurs, if there is already, it favors advanced regeneration, because the species of trees that are in the understory, let's say we have a white pine overstory, and you may have, like for example, as black spruce, white spruce, balsam fir understory, because they're very shade tolerant. Okay, so those species are growing underneath. The overstory is logged. So what species do have advantage of this? Okay, would be, for example, all these species, hemlocks, firs, some oaks if they are tolerant enough, black cherry, okay, and then you can also throw in there some of the maples. So the advanced regeneration is species which can regenerate by advanced regeneration, being able to grow underneath other trees, do well when there's logging, or when the tops get blown out, like I showed you that example, when the top got blown out. And I've seen it when I was out west, even avalanche areas. The young trees are flexy enough so they can bend with the avalanche, and after the snow melts, all those advanced growth trees can take up that area. Okay, what happens if something crazy happens, like a landslide or erosion, where you've basically scraped all the soil, all the living plants off, and there's nothing there anymore? What trees will take the advantage of invading that? Well, anything that can be windblown, right? Any tree that has very light seed, and that's cottonwoods, aspens, willows, alders, birches. Pines can even do that, right? Certain pines that can get their seed into the area. Okay. Now, this is certainly not going to work if it's an oak. The oaks will certainly not be able to reach into this area because they're not windblown, right? So based on the regeneration tactic of the species, the species you will find after disturbance can be very different from the one that was originally there. A lot of people believe, oh look, it's white pine forest, it'll be white pine after we harvest. Totally wrong thinking. It's based on the competition and the species that can take the best advantage of that site. And we'll be talking about it in this course extensively, how stands can change dramatically in the species composition based on their regeneration strategy. One really cool one I always like as far as a species is if there's a hot fire, and some of you firefighters out there can appreciate that, what species, like it burns everything and even can damage the stumps. Well, one is buried seed, and fire cherry or pin cherry, this seed can stay in the seed bed or in the understory, just a seed, for 10, 15 years, and then when there's a fire, or even 40 years, when there's a fire, those seeds become activated, and then suddenly, where you never saw any cherry, there's all kinds of cherry growing after a fire. And people say, well, where'd that come from? Well, it was in the seed bed. That's the strategy of this plant, this tree. And why has it developed like that? Because fire cherry, pin cherry, doesn't grow very tall. So after about 15 years, it gets outcompeted by other species of trees which invade, and it dies. And well, how does it survive for longevity into the future? It drops seeds back into the seed bed and awaits for the next fire. Pretty neat. So what we have here is a strategy, and you can see here the seed source. Okay, and I don't mean just how does the seed get there. Well, seed in form of advanced regeneration. In other words, while the tree was while the overstory was growing, the seed grew in the understory, and small trees, advanced regeneration took place. Okay, and over here, wait for disturbance. And this is the pin cherry idea. Okay, I just talked about where it waits for 30, 40 years until it's, and then it takes off. And then the last one is seed release after disturbance. And this can be, I'm just trying to think of some good examples. Large seeds, and this would be like your, for example, like oaks. Okay, large seeds. There are few seeds, and then many seeds. This could be like jack pine after disturbance, where the fire opens the serotinous cones and the seeds come out by the millions, and then we have a return of the forest. Okay. Now there's asexual reproduction, and that means there was no seed involved. Okay, so and what do we have? We have sprouting, suckering, and layering. Sprouting is from the stump. Suckering is from roots like poplar. So this would be like oak sprouting from, or maple from a stump. Suckering, if you damage a poplar tree, Populus tremuloides, and up comes the roots, will sucker all along the root system, and that's how it survives. And layering is noted most in black spruce, Pisceae mariana, where the tree branches come right down to the moss layer, the very moist layer, and where the tree branches touch the surface of the ground, the root systems will, a new root system will grow there and establish itself and become actually another tree over time, surrounding the mature tree. Sources of seed distribution, obviously, the wind is the biggest one where that distributes seed. That is a huge one, and a lot of the seeds have designed themselves to have wings on them like this, or they have little parachutes like cottonwood, okay, or aspens. And obviously acorns don't do much, and that's why when you, if this here is the tree right here, this shows you the maximum distance or typical distance you would find the seed distribute from a tree. And the tree is only like about maximum 30 meters tall, and it'd be lucky to get out to about maybe 40 meters. Maple has these wings. They can go out to about 120 meters. And the record is birch and poplar, the tiny little seeds, and they can go way out to pushing almost a mile or 1.6 kilometers. So you can see how an exposed area far away can be populated by these light wind capable seeds, as versus an oak, which has to be right in the vicinity. Different strategies for different trees for regeneration. Okay, another one which is not as common but is certainly used by different trees is anything which can catch the fur. The ones that, okay, now escapes me, ones that will do that. Now that, we will have to look that up. I just, right now that escapes me, but as far as squirrel caches, I'm talking about ones that catch on the, but squirrel caches, of course, one way oak can travel around, and lots of pine nuts, pine cones, excuse me, is squirrel caches. It's amazing how much is dropped that way. Dropping travel, birds which consume a lot of the black cherry and other types of fruit, fleshy fruit, of course, as they travel and they drop their droppings all throughout the countryside. And trees which have which are near water, like alders and willows, their seed can float, and then they can merely float along down the river and then establish in other areas. By the way, this here is a squirrel cache, and this can be seen. And then just pile them up there, and then some of them would actually start to grow. Squirrels forget about their cache. Okay, now seed production variation. Different trees have different productive bumper crops, and bumper crops, what that means is every 3 to 4 years, or every 2 years, some species, there is a huge crop of seeds, and that's the ones where is the majority of the regeneration will occur. Okay, many trees are prolific all the time. For example, aspens, red maple, they just produce seeds most of the time. Timing of the seeding, not all seed falls at the same time, and for example, the aspens seems to be earlier in the year, and it hits the ground and millions of seeds are distributed, and if it can grow, great, otherwise it dies. White oaks in the fall, and spring is more red oak for seed distribution, and years later cherry, as we've spoke about before. This is all in big blue and in detail for you to study under this tree autoecology. So how do we predict when different trees are regenerating? And the key one is we try to use, one of the most interesting ones is we were trying to predict when do we harvest hard maple for the seed, and so that has an influence on what happens with the red maple regeneration. So for an example here, if you have a hard maple stand with advanced red maple regeneration, no surprise if you remove the overstory of hard maple, the red maple will become the overstory, and then over time the understory will be red maple with balsam fir, which will eventually make this a red maple balsam fir stand. So do you see how this could be 100 years between each one of these, and the forest is changing. Just because you have hard maple first that there's no guarantee that you have hard maple in the future. And that's what forestry types, that's what we have to make sure of. We don't mess up the forest. So let's take a look at some examples here, and just so we get an idea. So let's start out with an, oops, I wanted to use, there we go. Let's start out with an abandoned farm field, and then over time, pines, white pines seed in before the hardwoods, and they grow larger. The pines, now let's imagine 100 years, the pines are removed for valued product because they're large and tall. But meanwhile, in the understory there was no pines because they were not shade tolerant. Hardwoods have grown in advanced regeneration, and they have quickly established a site. Therefore, we've gone from an abandoned farm field to a white pine forest to a hardwood forest. So you can see over 300 years what a change can occur. Here's another example. I'll just do a couple more. Here we have an abandoned farm field again, but this time because of the nearby poplar and birch, we have a poplar 70%, white birch 30%. That's how you read that. Okay, and then what happens is it gets older and older, and because white birch is very intolerant, the poplar squeezes it out and it becomes 90% poplar, 10% white pine, and then with an understory of maple and white pine because it's quite open grown, because it's very, okay. Then there's a disturbance, a big wind occurs usually around here, okay, and then the forest grows into a poplar stand 50%, maple 40%, white pine 10%, and then many years go by, and then we have here it changes over another 80 years to a maple 50%, white pine 30%, poplar 20%. So you can see how the forest changes over time, and that's the reality of disturbances. Disturbances do not ever bring you back the same forest you had before. Very, very rarely. So you, as forest techs, have to appreciate forest tree autoecology, tree silvics, and that's why we're going to have you guys learn that, and then learn and understand how do disturbances impact the forest and what changes will occur in the forest over time. That's why it's called forest dynamics. Pretty neat stuff. Thanks for listening. And by the way, if you hear constant little strange noises in the background, this has been this whole little video has been done outside. Thank you.